Okay, I think we're ready to roll here. Do that. Well, hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. You can find all my stuff at dailyevolver.com. I love hearing from you. You can write me at jeff@dailyevolver.com, or you can go to the Daily Evolver website, click the Connect tab, and you can leave me a voicemail there. I can't respond to everybody like I'd like, but I do read and listen to everything you send, and I do occasionally share comments on new episodes, both written and recorded. And that is, in a sense, the genesis of this episode on Brexit, which is a conversation with a longtime listener of the Daily Evolver, Anne Roberts from Scotland, who wrote me about her concerns over Brexit and, as she put it, the ongoing political disruption that is so complex and unsettling. And she wrote, "I would so appreciate your insight to help me relax into the arc of history and understand what is emerging here so that I am not overly concerned for the future of our young ones." Now, I had wanted to comment on Brexit for a while and to make the case that at Integral Consciousness, we can begin to put our trust in emergence itself rather than in institutions and certainly people. Institutions and people come and go, and they're unreliable in the meantime. But the updraft of emergence, the arc of history, if you will, is built into the cosmos. And as I often state, a thesis of mine in the Daily Evolver is that the leading edge of humanity, which certainly includes the UK and the European Union, at this leading edge of evolution, we have reached the stage where we can evolve peacefully, intelligently, and even intentionally at the very highest stage, where we realize, wait a second, I can co-create my life and the world, and it becomes overt and clear. I was still a little hesitant to tackle Brexit because I'm not steeped in British politics. But with Anne, I had the opportunity to talk to somebody who is a Brit and who also, like me, is attempting to look at things from an integral perspective. That's important. And so I suggested we have a conversation and record it, and maybe I could use a piece of it or whatever. And so we did that. And it turned out that Anne is a very good guest. And so I'm playing the whole thing. She's a committed integralist herself. She is doing work of her own in the field. And she is working with colleagues in rethinking old age from an integral perspective, the last stage of life. And I love what she's doing. And we talk about that as well, particularly at the end. And I may share more about it in the future. At any rate, I provide a link to her website, Active Wisdom Inquiry, in the write-up. All right, so this is my conversation with Anne Roberts, and I start by asking her to share what some of her concerns are about it and where she's coming from. So here's our conversation. Thanks again for listening to the Daily Evolver. And then I share desktop 2, and I do the sound, and I optimize, and I share it. Then I come over here and I play it. So yeah, and so you wrote me about Brexit and your sort of feelings about it that have some despair energy. And why don't you just tell me a little bit about how you're seeing it and what your concerns are?
So what I realized was I didn't really understand what was going on. so much disruption, as you probably saw.
So yeah, and so you wrote me about Brexit and your sort of feelings about it that have some despair energy. And why don't you just tell me a little bit about how you're seeing it and what your concerns are?
So what I realized was I didn't really understand what was going on. And there was so many viewpoints coming at us through the media, on television, so much disruption, as you probably saw in our Houses of Parliament, and I couldn't make my own sense of it. And I remember thinking when I was listening, I remember it was the podcast about the 20 candidates for president, that you were analysing, and I just thought, I'd love Jeff's take on this. What might he see? And that was what led me to reach out to you. But since we've had the election and you came back to me after the election, you reaching out to me has got me thinking, I need to be ready for this call. So I've done some research, and the pieces I'd like to drop into the pot with you, the pond, is representative politics brings consensus. That's the aha I got. I listened to Lord Sumption, who's a justice, a Superior Court justice, and he was saying it brings compromise with differing viewpoints. And what a binary choice does, like a referendum, is it polarizes and there's no place for compromise. That was huge for me. And our Houses of Parliament and the government tried to find the consensus from a binary vote. And there wasn't a sufficient majority. And it was like nobody, they knew what they didn't want, but they didn't know what they wanted. And we couldn't, and we've ended up going back into a general election. The Tories now have a thumping majority and will be in power now for the next 5 years. They've got the legislation through this month. They've also got Stormont in Northern Ireland back up and running within 2 weeks of the new year. So they're on a roll. So in a sense, Brexit is past, but I'd love your take on how politics, does seek consensus, and what the American situation is. Where is representative politics bringing compromise in your world?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that there's sometimes a role for both, actually, and I can see, even just theoretically, sometimes it's hard to look at it in terms of its consequences in real life, but how polarization is actually a stage on the path. And that polarization makes us broaden the field. So you have people over here and you have people over here, and we really see, we get a clarity of the differences in how we see the world, basically. The world spaces that we live in. I always love that term from Ken Wilber, where it's literally different things we see, different things we think are important, different ways we process that information, different conclusions we come to, our hearts quicken to different things, and that's not such a bad thing that we see that, even though it's ugly and often historically has been resolved through war. And in a way, it is being resolved through war now. But it's a culture war. So it's a war that is not hot. You have some skirmishes here and there, and they're tragic when they happen, but nothing like history, even in our lifetime, Anne.
Yeah.
So, so that's not necessarily a bad thing. And then sometimes we sort of lumber forward with the left getting, a grip, and then the right wresting it away, and they sort of stake out some new territory. And this is where I say that evolution is beautiful but not pretty. And we often move forward in these ways that, it's basically through fighting. That's the nature of evolution in general. It's also, we move forward through love. So the talk about two poles. That's another, polarity that is energizing the cosmos, basically. So, so with that, I would. So you have your Tory government now, and that would be the equivalent of our Republicans. It's the right, and they, as you said, have a thumping majority now, and they are on a roll. And so I'm going to ask you a question. And my question to you is, what do you think, what piece of the truth do they have? I mean, what do they have their arms around that the leftists or their political opponents didn't see, or, what's going on here?
So I think the biggest thing was people are tired that it's 3 years since the referendum result and we were getting nowhere. So there was Brexit exhaustion. The other thing that intrigues me is when I'm jumping, but let me just go there just now. When it was 52% for to leave and 48% to leave, and 27% didn't vote.
I think you might have misspoke there. It was 52 to leave, 48 to stay.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
To stay, and with 27% of the vote, no voting. And there was a sense that 52% was a majority that was unequivocal. And so that majority said, the only people who are going to do what we want is the Tories. And Labour, the left, tried to offer a solution both to the left and to the Leave and Remain, and they got lost. They also offered a radical agenda that was unrealistic, the left did, whereas the Tories have been in power for 10 years, and they are seen as more safe to govern than Labour.
Very similar to the dynamics in the States. Okay. Yeah.
And what the piece that they have is that the people who voted them in are the working class, not the very poor, but, and I don't know what you call them in the States, but they've appealed to that. They're not well off, but they're not in poverty. And particularly a number of them in the north of England left their Labour strongholds. But interestingly, those places that used to be what we call mining villages, the elder population who vote Tory are now growing there. So the electorate is shifting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true here too. And it represents a move from economic motivation to cultural motivation. And part of the reason for that is that we now have a new culture online that we didn't have 40 years ago, and that's the postmodern culture. And before that, when everybody was either modern or traditional, people would vote more along economic lines because that was where the action was. Now, it's stunning to see that the people you're talking about, which are basically traditionalists, and these are the people who didn't leave home. These are the people who home and hearth, religion, family, all of that is primary. They didn't want to leave home and go strike out in the big city, and they get to actually be here, and they get to have a voice. And these are the people who had an allergic reaction to globalism, which in a way seeks to harmonize or blenderize, in its worst sense, culture, People can move between states, goods, and all of that good stuff. And of course, from a modern perspective, that's like, you bet, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the traditionalists, I way underestimated how allergic they were to that. But I get it now in a way that I certainly didn't. And it's not just cultural, it's economic, in the sense that I think this is true in Great Britain as well, that there's these smaller towns have been economically devastated too. That's certainly true in the States. Big cities are doing great, you know. So that's a lot of what Brexit's about. And to me, that, how I've come to see it, this is like the last year and a half, but how I've come to see it is that it is the culture as a whole saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be subsumed into a European identity. The British identity is too important, and we're feeling suffocated. And I get it. I get it now. And I actually think that in a more integrated world, so that we get this polarity, this grinding polarity, and you know, it's replete with hatred and demonization and condemnation and all of the stuff that we see. But what comes out of that is a new integration where there is the best of modernity, globalism, the best of multiculturalism from postmodernity, and the best of the patriotism, I don't know, the spirit of the people, the spirit of the land, the spirit of the culture that also gets to be online in this new integration. So.
And that's what I love about the optimism that you bring. One of the things, just to touch into what you were saying about the past, we were the only country in Europe in the Second World War that wasn't invaded almost. And so there is something about sovereignty and almost like a nostalgia for a simpler and a slower time. Yep. But I've also got two daughters who are passionately European. They were born into the European story. And so Brexit also seems to be segmenting generationally and regionally. You know, we've got the big thing in Scotland here about we're heading for an independence vote because we voted 60+% to remain. And the dilemma for me was, I wanted to remain and I'm in Scotland. Who did I vote for? Because I didn't want to vote for independence, but there was nobody else I felt I could vote for to protect Brexit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, and I don't necessarily see a problem with Scottish independence. I mean, and I actually don't see ultimately, and I see you folks are actually fighting about this right now in terms of how Brexit might be implemented, that there would be, you know, opportunities for free trade deals with companies everywhere and all of that sort of thing. We can do that now. I mean, we have a sufficiently complex system that we don't need these huge, big, monolithic bureaucracies in the way that we might have even 20 years ago. Or you know, when Brexit was actually huge progress in terms of getting its arms around this continent, you know, and integrating it economically. That's not going away. At least the heart of that is not going away. And this is one of the things that I think integral and evolutionary theory in general, it gives us the opportunity to see. And that is that we can trust, we don't need to trust institutions as much as we could trust emergence itself. And the intelligence that people gained and have gained, it's not going away. We're not going back to the, you know, make America great again time. You know, we're not going back to that. But we are bringing some of that forward into a new integration that, you know, we modernists thought we could get away with just forgetting about it. I mean, I did.
How do you hold, so there's a time, it's the concept of time for me as you speak. And one of the things I felt during the week, during the year, was I was so in it, like a mouse, you know, head down, living it day by day. And what I felt you do and did is you elevate us up to this 30,000 feet. But my question is, will it happen in my lifetime? You know, I'm 69 now, and I'm very aware of people talking about, you know, in 2051, I'll be 100. You know, so my longevity is becoming palpable as I watch what's unfolding, and what will my grandchildren be experiencing. So how do you hold your optimism, and what do you see as the timing of this arc of history?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's accelerating, for one thing, as it has been. I mean, it's, if we think of how our grandparents lived, and not just how they lived, but how they thought, and male-female role differences, you know, all of this sort of thing. And in 1-2 generations, how that shifted. And in terms of race relations, in terms of, you know, larger identity. So you have daughters who are European by identity, you know, hallelujah, that's great. And so this, you know, all of that continues and accelerates. What's also true is that there's tragedies all along the way. There's a wake of tragedy. And, you know, and this is one of the things that hang people up about the idea that the world is getting better in most ways, is that doesn't mean that it's good. And so there are going to be, you know, people emboldened that we don't want to have emboldened, you know, real racists, you know. There are going to be companies that, you know, were completely organized around a pre-Brexit world that are, and farmers, and I don't know how it's, you know, what's going to shake down in terms of this year and next year and the next 5 years. And we, you know, what Integral gives us is an opportunity to really have just a bigger timeline. You know, it's just what you were saying. But we don't want to lose track of the smaller timeline either. And so, you know, we're trying to do both and to have our hearts open to the, you know, just this calamity of history. You know, it just, I mean, I blame God. I mean, I wouldn't have said it. But here we are. And then we got to die too, Anne. I'm 66, you know, and I want to see, you know, I want to see what the next iPad looks like. I mean, I want to see all of it. And I guess I have some, I don't know if it's faith, maybe, but I think we might. I think we might see it. I don't know. From where and how, I don't know. But, you know.
I mean, do you have a belief that technology, that some, as you know, I've been reading a book by a woman called Jude Currivan, and it's the cosmic hologram, information at the center of creation or the universe, you know. And again, another of those books completely at my edge, but you know there's something there. And this intention of evolution and the information that if we can tap into it, and if we, she says, I'm doing a course, an online course of hers at the moment, and she says, if we choose, we'll get through the climate emergency, if we choose. And I'm left wondering, how do we get to a collective global choosing?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, well,
and that,
yeah, well, it's true that the world's being stretched more and more evolutionarily. So the leading edge is continuing to accelerate. So we have, you know, in the developed world, 25-30% of the people are postmodern. And yet there's this big majority of people on the planet still who are, at least in their hearts, they're still traditionalists and pre-modern, and they're not going to get a world-centric view. The climate's not going to register with them. They are going to feel somewhat conned by it. It's another thing that you know, intellectuals and you globalists are talking about, and you media. And so we just sort of have to accept that.
What do you mean by conned? Tell me what that means.
That you're basically trying to take over the economy. You want to put constraints on capitalism. You're just, annoying me, basically. They don't get it. I mean, they may get it in terms of some passing a test and some information, but in their hearts, they don't care that much. That's what it, I mean, until you're world-centric, you're not world-centric. And and so from an integral perspective, which is more cosmocentric, at least we try, we see this system and we see that everybody gets to be where they are. And we also see something else, which is that the world tends to be ruled by people at the higher stages, especially now, where we have, the people at the top of business and NGOs and governments, for the most part, at least modern governments. These people are terribly conscious. They have a lot of understanding of culture and interiors and also the exteriors and supply lines and all of that good stuff. And then there's just the in terms of the climate, there's just so much going on under its own power, if you will. So it's not about getting a global consensus or getting everybody to believe the way you do or I do, which is, of course, every first tier meme. And we're talking traditionalism, modernism, postmodernism, and actually the ones earlier to that as well. But they all think they have the only right view. And so, those of us who see the climate emergency, those of us who are world-centric, we think our task is to make everybody see that. And I think there's another task, and that is to just open your heart to all of it, see that there is how did you put it? Well, the way I would put it is procreant urge. There's something built into the cosmos that is moving us forward.
Yeah.
And it's this information, and it actually is an intelligence. Intelligence is built into the cosmos. That's one of the things that Integral reveals to us, if you will. And not only information, but love. Yeah, love is, in the fabric of the universe. And, it's one of the sort of axioms of futurism, is that people tend to overestimate what's going to happen in the next year, but wildly underestimate what's going to happen in the next decade. And I think that's really interesting here, because if we think of 10 years ago, social media basically didn't exist. It was just starting. Now if you think of how that has changed the world, good stuff, and completely unpredictable, certainly 20 years ago. And the turn in the economy from being growth-oriented to sustainability-oriented, that's a move from an orange economy to a green economy, or modern to postmodern economy. That's happening. That's happening in so many ways. And as is, the consciousness of the climate challenge. And, those of us who paid attention had to sit through this, fire season in Australia that was just, I mean, what could you say? Yes, the animals and the people and the but does that shift consciousness? Yes. Is Australia going to be far more climate conscious next year than they were last year? Yes. And so this is just that brutal, moving forward of history that I think is challenging to get your head and heart around, honestly.
Yeah. And it's this thing about true but partial piece of Integral that always speaks to me, is when I'm listening, where's the truth and where's the partiality, and how do I hold my balance with it? and this thing about love as well, about holding that appreciation as it comes to me, looking at Boris and saying, I love you.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah,
and
just don't ask me to do that about Trump.
No, couldn't even do that.
I'd have to start again to do that. But no, of course not. But it's challenging, and both these guys are. I mean, you can see the power of these world spaces. So you get somebody, and your heart's in, postmodern, multicultural progress, globalism, and then you get this guy, you see him immediately as a buffoon. You see him immediately as an evil, and you sort of can't help it. It's reflexive. It says as much about you as it does about them. And that's interesting right there.
It's about lies, and about not telling the truth and justice, and all those green things.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And yet, from their perspective, Trump is, what is he at 16,000 official, or what would you say, proven lies, basically 16,000 proven lies since he elected. And yet for the people who love him, he's telling a capital T truth that is more important than all of that. And that is that this soul of America is being snuffed out in this march towards globalism and multiculturalism. That's a bigger truth than all of these lies for them. And, so we talk about truth, but partial. Well, let's move back to Britain. So there's there's a Britishness that the people that we're talking about who live in the mining towns and so forth, that's Chris Matthews, one of our commentators here, he says that sort of being an American is all a lot of these people have. I mean, that's their real identity. They might have religion and so forth too, but they got that Britishness, they got that Americanness. And so what's true but partial, that's such an interesting term. So what's true is that Britishness is precious. It's got a lineage that is just florid and rich, and this culture, you can't, we could wax poetic about it.
I've got this rise of emotion as you're speaking.
Yes, and Scottishness.
Yeah.
And so we want that. So what's partial is the traditional claim that theirs is the best and only, culture. That traditionalists also believe in their bones that the world would be a better place if everybody were British. God knows you tried for about a century to make that happen, and with a great deal of success. So that's the part we don't want, is that exclusivity claim, that claims to superiority.
Yeah, and this whole migration piece, of what's happening is people from the southern hemisphere migrating north, and we have, we've always had a generous spirit, so sometimes I get confused by the closing down of that generous spirit.
Well, you might have overestimated the generous spirit. At least I don't know your history as well as ours, but every wave of migrants was met with hostility.
Yes.
Yeah, and then so so they had to scrape by in the first generation. The second generation got educated, and the third generation entered the power structures.
And we're still living with the Windrush generation. I don't know if the people who came from the Caribbean.
Yes.
And so they still don't have the rights.
Yes.
40 years on. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And no,
right.
it's a mess. But you could still see within that mess a new complexity, a bigger circle of people who are in and versus people who are out. That circle has grown. And you definitely see that in America. I'm sure you see that there too, that despite the, all the anger, at least in America, over race, and, Trump and all of this, stuff that's going on around race, actual racial attitudes have gotten better, in terms of how people actually see each other. That is improved significantly. So it's a strange thing that this fighting, and where we want to say this shouldn't be happening, we should all be getting along, which actually is code for everybody should think like I do. That we relax that and just see that the fighting actually is fruitful. And so then our job is to fight as fairly as possible to keep it from going violent. We have a whole new project now. In some ways, we're like the grandparents who see the grandkids and, I love them all. But, ay, ay, ay. So that's, I think, an integral spirit around it that can contain this heartbreak and tragedy. And I always love the last line of the Desiderata, which is one of the posters you might have had in your dorm room. I certainly did. But with all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it's still a beautiful world. Strive to be happy. I always love that line because it holds both.
It's like this self-reflection as I listen to you, about where, I still am working with the polarization piece. That hasn't landed with me fully, in the sense that we were offered a choice that polarized our society. And we had our representative democracy lost its place. Yeah. So, and it's come back again now, but the years, so what is the benefit of that what is the benefit of that polarization for what you're saying is coming? What is it teaching us as a nation? What will we be paying attention to over the next 10 years?
Well, a couple things. One is that I want to be careful, even within myself, to not just see that whatever happened is the best possible thing that could have happened. And so, the way that this has landed and been dealt with, and the maybe unnecessary polarization that has come from it, there might have been a better way to do it. There probably was. There basically always is in hindsight. So, it's not like this was the best of all possible things. But what I can say with that said is that there is a fruitfulness that comes out of polarization that is, and it's just, it gets very personal in a way. It's like, what do you understand about your political opponents now that you didn't 2 or 3 years ago? What part of their argument do you get that you didn't? And I would argue that there is some, and that it would not have happened had there not been this struggle and fight and emotion and all of the things that human beings bring to our relationships with each other, both in our personal lives, in our, group versus group. We're just nightmares, we humans. But that gets us somewhere. And what I'll say is that I've learned a lot. And I come from these people. I come from the coal mines of Western Pennsylvania. And my family, big family, still lives there. And I love them and they love me. And I still didn't get it in the way that I do now. The hopelessness, the town I grew up in, the drugs, how my cousins' kids are struggling and their grandkids are hopeless. Some of them, I mean, there's all kinds of exceptions, but there's something that's going on there that my heart breaks in a way I had no idea. I just wanted, I was glad to be away. I was glad to be gone from there. And I think that's happening in ways that we underestimate. I mean, if you go to the comment section under these political articles, or go to Reddit, and where people are arguing, it's brutal and hideous, but it's still just keystrokes And there's something about being confronted with the world space of another person, with a different world space. Remember we were talking about world spaces? There's something about that encounter that is fruitful, even though it, like I said, looks ugly. It is ugly. So, the short answer is, what have you learned about them that you didn't know? And then, of course, what you sort of can't expect a tit for tat, because they're not necessarily going to learn about you in the same way. But that's just the nature of things. It's like, what the expectations one can have from an 8-year-old versus a 12-year-old versus a 16-year-old. And that's a scandalous statement, because I'm actually saying that there's an earlier stage of development online here. But that's unfortunately what Integral says. And the good news is the further understanding of this Integral is that everybody's 100% precious and gets to be who they are. And hallelujah. Thank God, because this is what we actually need, is these competing world spaces for humanity to continue our, adventure.
So you stay optimistic.
Oh yeah, I feel it.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of a lot of our, arguments and thinking and logic, is that we start by feeling it and then we sort of explain it from there.
Yeah. I mean, as you're speaking, my optimism is I'm in Scotland with a social democratic government. So they're doing the things that I want, the free prescription charges, education, so in Scotland, we have an administration that really, but there is no centre ground in England at the moment. So as I listen to you about what have I learned, I've learned about the difference between the dominant force of England that constrains what we're not big enough, and what you've given me is independence such a bad idea?
I mean, why would it be necessary? It's not like you're going to go to war again. You're just going to.
They're basically saying that we get a settlement from England, you see, and we would lose that. It's called the Barnett formula. We would lose that, and so we'd have to be self-sufficient.
Well, there is that.
And all of the research is saying we'll have 10 years of austerity if we, and maybe it's worth it. And
maybe.
The interesting thing is, we might get a united Ireland. Northern Ireland might join with the South, and then Scotland will be independent, and all of a sudden the border will be between Scotland and England.
Yeah.
There's lots of fun possibilities.
Yeah, and I think, however that goes, again, trust emergence more than institutions. De facto, that's happening. Scottishness is going to become more delicious to the Scots, and Welshness and Irishness. All of these in what I see is, I often call it the sacred world to come. All of these things will be 100% vividly themselves. This is not going to be a homogenized new system. And that's actually what a lot of this reaction that we're seeing in Trumpism and the Brexit people is that, wait a second, gang, you're not going to keep this blender thing going here, this multicultural, globalized thing going, without keeping the precious identity that, is so important to us. And it turns out that it's going to be, important to everybody, because it's, if we think, and this is sometimes how I think about it, because you and I both understand the spiral dynamics of these stages of development. So those go right down to archaic, which is where we're just waking up as human beings. We actually have an animal nature, and an instinctual nature. And then we have a tribal nature. And then we have this sort of empire kind of nature where we want our group to feel powerful, and all of those actually in an integral, healthy, integral human being, you want all of those to be online.
Yeah.
So you want to have this deep identity with family and your dad. And you wrote this beautiful blog post about when somebody dies, an entire library is lost. I love that. And so we want to feel all of that karma of our history in ways that, modernity was poo-pooing that. It was a little embarrassed by that. And so we want to bring that back online and our, again, Scottishness, this beautiful history. Oh my goodness. And this just way of being in your amazing landscape up there, how humans, it's just beautiful. And so we want actually to light up every one of those centers. And interestingly enough, they also correspond with our chakra centers. So, it's a sort of a new practice. So I'm seeing our internet there.
There we go. You're
back. Did I freeze up?
You did.
Yeah.
So I only got to I think you'd finished the red. Where were you going after that?
Yes. Yeah. Well, then, we want to feel our, we want to get our religion back, basically. Not in the way that is, triumphalistic and, have the superiority and that Christianity is the only way, or what, every religion thinks that at the traditional stage. But we also, modernity wrung out all religious sentiment and, basically disenchanted the world. It was a necessary move, but we actually want to bring that back. Mm-hmm. So, religion might turn into more of an art form, but it also becomes a portal to the numinous and to this loving intelligence that people have always intuited. Modernists, materialism explains it away, says it doesn't really exist, it's just a delusion. But really? So we want to light that just the I amness up. I am a member of my family and my own individual karma in history. I am a member of my people. I am a member of my nation. And then, to the degree that we continue to go, is that I am a citizen of the world. Nothing is not mine. Everything is mine. You get into Walt Whitman, territory at this point, And then we move into the cosmocentric, where we just love the whole catastrophe, And
so what's the vividness that you see for America? I loved how you spoke to the vividness of Scotland and Ireland and Wales and England, and it'll have its uniqueness.
Yeah.
And how does that come for the United States of America?
Thank you. That's a good question. I could contemplate it. Well, first of all, we have the indigenous people, so they came over 14, 20,000 years ago. And had this amazing culture, it turns out. There's a wonderful book called 1491 that talks about America the year before Columbus arrived. And the cultures in South America, Central America, North America. And so that was all, the Europeans came over and, so here we have one of the catastrophes of history, if you will. We have people who are at a tribal stage or a red stage in the terms of, particularly in South America, we have these great empires, the Incas, the Aztecs, and so forth.
The Mayas.
Yes, exactly. And, but tribal to red. And then we have basically red to blue or red to amber traditionalists, so they have ships and they have the wheel and they have control over fire and they have metal and they have guns. They also have germs.
Yes.
So, but it's this clash of stages, and a lot of human history and a lot of human art and literature. It's just about this clash of these world spaces, because every world space also has a technology. And, you know, you get modern technology versus traditional technology, or traditional technology versus tribal technology. There's no contest. It's just brutal. It's a slaughter.
Yeah.
And we've seen plenty of that in human history. So I want to feel that. I want to actually see that as clearly as possible. I mean, history is always looking through the glass darkly. But I want to get that as clearly and accurately as possible. And I want to feel the karmas of the land as it was before the Europeans. And then, you know, what happened after the Europeans come. And of course, America is, if we move into the typologies of integral, America was founded by the Europeans, but particularly the ones who were the outcasts, and the adventurers, the people who said, I'm willing to get on a boat and go 3 months over the sea and never return. So what's that enneatype? You know, what is that psychograph of that person? Because that's who came here. And then of course the prisoners and the, you know, religious nuts. And, you know, so we have that karma in America. And so I want to feel that, because there's an Americanness to that. There's an expansion, there's an adventuresomeness, you know, there's that kind of a spirit of you know, rejecting the tyrannies of history and the monarchies and all of that stuff. And I want to feel into that. And then there's always a polarity. You know, we talk about these polarities, and we want to, you know, really plug into them and to even expand them. So one of the great polarities that any person can have about their culture is the polarity of gratitude and the polarity of grievance. So I can look at really any stage of American history and see what came online here, you know, and what was the grievance. So we have slavery. And, you know, again, a traditional to modern culture going over and taking tribal people. And, you know, it's brutal. But then also the move into modernity, particularly in the North, where modernity is really the first stage in human history to make slavery illegal and outlaw. And that's true worldwide. And so I want to, you know, feel into the gratitude of that. So it's a mess and it's an ongoing project, but out of it comes an Americanness that is, everybody recognizes it. You know, everybody has an opinion about it, and it flourishes, you know, differently. You know, every church has a congregation of one. Everybody has their own version of it. But I get it. And I actually get, you know, despite my somatic revulsion of Donald Trump, I get how he lights that up in people for whom it is really important. In fact, it is key to their identity. And I see that there's something they have that I had lost or that I hadn't seen. And to be a bigger, better Jeff, if you will, you know, more integral, more developed, if you will. I want to bring that. I want to bring that back online in myself. So something like that.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, really interesting. You know, and I love America, and it takes me into elderhood. As you know, I'm working in this field, and I was listening to Stephen Jenkinson, and something about heritage and lineage, and how does that play into, you know, my husband at the moment, he's so wrapped up in genealogy at the moment. He's 74, and he's finding pictures of his grandfather on the farm, and it's really touching something in him. And I wonder where elderhood fits with the transition now. And this thing in America, okay, boomer, which someone was talking about in one of our calls the other day, about how do we people of my generation who are living longer, who are resourced. I mean, I finished work and I have a capacity to do something with my life, and I need to find that purpose and movement. And there's a lostness sometimes in the people that I encounter around this time in their lives.
Yeah, no, I know. No, it's every person, if you scratch the surface and look in there, there's a tragic something, it being human is tragic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a given. And, we go from there. And yeah, I think I would in some ways bow to you in this question, because you've written, I was reading your blog posts about elderhood, and you transmit, I think, a very clear understanding of what elders bring. It's the library. It's this whole story, yeah, and all the stories and all the world spaces that we've inhabited, and that's going to be valuable. That is valuable, and there are a lot of young people who get it and or will. It's like your husband. He's actually probably appreciating his ancestors a whole lot more at 74 than he was at 24.
Yeah.
And that's just the nature of things. I remember, and you do too, when we were young, don't trust anybody over 30. I mean, I rolled my eyes at the idea that my grandparents would have anything to tell me of value. And that's just in some ways the nature of evolution too, because for most of human history, grandparents, we all lived the same life. So the fact that they had 30 more years was actually really valuable, because they'd seen 30 more turns of the sun and animals and whatever. So they were a fount of wisdom. But now, my grandparents were traditional, and I was moving into modern. I lost my religion, right? And I moved into postmodern. I sort of rejected the whole, traditional thing.
And one of the things that John Freeman said to me, and I really appreciate your view on this, was sometimes now for people of my generation who stop work, if your consciousness adapts to life conditions and you've got more space, there is the potential for you to grow at this time in your life, and to be seen to be curious, seen to be adventuring and not being traditional. But equally, I encounter people who are very comfortable being traditional as grandparents, and there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No,
They're
hallelujah.
babysitting. Yeah, they're babysitting, and they're there for the grandkids, and they're hanging out with them, and that's
it's all they ever wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah. God bless them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was cursed with a, I wasn't ever sad. My mother would say, "You're never satisfied," and she's true. She's right. So I keep going, and you do too, and that's what makes the world go round.
Yeah.
But to appreciate each other is, really, really a gift, and it begins the thing that will be characterized by Integral, and that is a real peace, in a real community where everybody is seen for who they are, and where they are and how they are, and what they bring to the party. No exceptions,
What I love is how you hold those two poles, in the sense that critical critiquing of understanding, but that generous understanding. And it's that flow between the two that I admire.
Yeah.
And not to lose yourself. One of the things Stephen Jenkinson said as well is grief is the midwife of alertness, he wrote. So when sadness does come at something, it's what you were saying, is what have I learned about the people that I'm not in agreement with?
Yeah.
even when they're shouting the odds at things.
I know. No, I
Yeah.
know it's they're terrible. They're so
No,
annoying.
but I get it.
Yeah, yeah, I do too.
And
Well, go on.
one of the things I did in 1996, I met some Native American Indians who came over to Scotland on an outreach program. And so I've studied since 96 a Mayan earth wisdom tradition. So when you spoke to the earth wisdom, well, the indigenous tradition, in Scotland, our lineage was broken by Christianity. So for the Celtic indigenous, it's harder sometimes to find the maps. Whereas with the Native American traditions, there is this lineage and continuity that you can really touch into.
Yeah.
And it's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah, it really is. And it, of course, happened all over the planet. That was a stage of development. And it was, nature-based. There was an embeddedness in nature that we get wrested out of at modernity, and we start to see it instead of be part of it. And that's a stage of development that is necessary, and we apparently have to lose our religion in order to re-embrace it in a way that is more alive. But part of that is, and it's easy, it's actually easy. It's like walk out and talk to a tree and then listen and see what the tree might answer you. Or just walk. I was just actually out, did a tour of the Grand Canyon, just got back yesterday. And to see the walls of the Grand Canyon as if I had a pre-modern mind. So I don't know anything about erosion. I don't know anything about big history. All I could see is that I was walking along this scrub, sagebrush, and all of a sudden this new world opened to me. And it's jaw-droppingly beautiful. And I can see a mile up these walls. They're a mile high. And to the degree that I can actually practice having a pre-modern mind, it's just alive. I mean, I see the faces of my ancestors. I see just an enchantment through the whole thing. That's not that hard, really. It's just a practice. You just go out and do it.
In the tradition, they called it sometimes the shimmering, where you were in this almost altered state, but your perceptions were very, very present. I was listening to The Guardian paper does long reads, and one of the long reads was about cave paintings. And just what you were saying is there's no human depictions in these cave paintings. They painted these incredible things of animals. Yeah. But, so that immersion,
yes. Yes.
And the Up from Eden book, do you remember that Ken wrote?
Oh, totally. Yeah, big book for me.
Oh, I didn't understand all of it, but there was enough there to get the emergence.
Yes.
And I hear you talking, that's what you're talking about, is that trajectory.
Yes. Yes. And that's a big switch. That's a fundamental switch that we get to do at Integral, is this idea of up from Eden. So all first tier memes, for those who know traditional, even postmodern, all think that humanity is screwed up and we drove it all into a ditch and, we've fallen from paradise. We've sinned and fallen from paradise. Even a lot of the climate emergency has that sort of quality to it. At Integral, we see that we actually have risen from the swamps and that we are moving maybe towards paradise. If you look at the trajectory of history, the way you and I live would be paradise to our ancient ancestors. We have enough to eat. Let's start there. We don't have lice. We don't have toothaches. We have central heating. I mean, please, we have light bulbs. How many golden calves would the Pharaoh have traded for a light bulb? So so if the trajectory continues,
yes, that's it.
Then more paradise, and so that's a new story to tell. It actually turns out that there's a religious story to that that science actually gives us access to. So there's a new integration that science shows us that something blew out of nothing 13.8 billion years ago.
Yeah.
And it has turned into this conversation with Jeff and Ann. All right, something's going on here. And so we can actually begin to see there's a loving intelligence. There's something that's going on here that we don't have to know in the way that we did in traditional religion, where we had to get the story straight and, different from their story. We don't need that. This is, I always love Carl Jung, who said, I don't believe in God, I know God.
Mm.
So there's a new kind of religion because we can actually see it and feel it in our own minds and bodies in any given moment.
And what intrigues me is, where is evolution going biologically? Some writers say that we're kind of complete with biological evolution, and the evolution is about consciousness.
And culture.
Yes, that
which
human...
is basically the collective consciousness, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say more.
Well, you talk about consciousness continues to evolve, which I totally agree with. And even using the quadrants, so consciousness is individual consciousness.
Right.
And then the lower left quadrant is the collective version of that, which is culture. So the things we agree on, multiple human beings agree on. So that continues to evolve too. And we can see that in history. That, even the stages of evolution, we can, as we talk about lighting up all of these stages in us, we could see that we actually have done that as individual humans. I mean, I was merged with mother for the first, what do they call it? The fourth trimester, where I'm, and then I'm born into a magical world where I could fly and all of the stuff, and then my family is the key, and then my family gets bigger to the cousins, and then the school and the town, and we've all recapitulated that individually. Yeah.
And I've got a 2-year-old grandson at the moment, and just he's in this and tussling with everything, and
right.
and to really understand it means that you're really patient and you can enjoy it. And you don't have to feel, I've got to, control it. I'll say to him, would you like Nana to do such and such? No, okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And there's no, whereas I might have felt as a parent, sort of a bit more Humphrey-Mumphrey.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you give me another level of optimism, is this up from Eden trajectory that, goodness knows what did you say? What's it, the things that the people that we have now, they would give their eye teeth for? I don't know what you used the word.
Oh, how many golden calves would the Pharaoh trade for a light bulb or a little plug-in heater?
What golden calves are going to come our way?
I know
that we don't even comprehend.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's lots of people thinking about that, and but I just think we'll just be more sensitive, more loving, more enchanted. I sort of focus on the interiors. Technology will continue, of course, and maybe we'll augment ourselves with implants. But this is where it's like, I welcome death. It's like Facebook was too much for me. I'm not gonna go there, and so maybe I'll get recycled, and I'll have the complexity to be able to do that. But if we can see, one of the ways you can see evolution is just the complexity of technology, of consciousness, of the things we can think about and be aware of. I can see the world moving past me. I could see where a lot of the social media, I just don't have the capacity to grasp it. It's too much. And that's all right. I get it. And yet every 14-year-old gets it like the back of their hand. So it's fun to watch.
He's got the He's got that, and he knows what icons to go to, and he knows how to flip up and what have you. And he's two, you know. It's just with him.
No.
But what's lovely about what you're saying is to let it pass you by. And when I'm working with the elders now, is it took me a while to come to terms with. I had a relatively big career for a while, and then I retired, and the phone didn't ring. And I was quite an achiever, you know, it was a big achiever energy, you know, project management, you know. And it's taken me about 4 or 5 years for that transition, where what I do gives me joy, and it doesn't have to be big to make a difference, you know, to feel important anymore.
Yeah.
And that was a biggie for me. And they talk about us going through identity crises at this stage with this emerging longevity. And I really know what that feels like in myself, that lostness, and to have good buddies around me who's kind of stuck with it. And then finding my way into co-creation. And that's been a biggie for me, to learn the skills of true co-creation, you know, with its generosity and generativity.
Oh, fantastic.
So, yeah.
That's beautiful. And, you know, there's a couple of integral insights that arise out of what you said. One is that while we can be left behind, we're generally being left behind in the exterior quadrants, the right-hand quadrants, if you will. So our bodies are falling apart, and, you know, we're not keeping up with technology, and it's all kind of confusing. But in the interiors, no, we continue to consciousness. I'm way more conscious than I was 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 40 years ago. It's not even, I can't believe it. And also in terms of our ability to work with other people, to see other people more deeply, all of that continues to grow. We're not being left behind there. We're leading way there. And that's another pattern. This is another insight we have in Integral, is that another pattern of development is, you know, it's well mapped out how children develop. 2 years old to 4 years old, all of that, so forth. But there's sort of a kind of an idea that we stop developing. Well, we used to think we stopped developing at about 18 or 20. Now there's a new understanding, I think mainstream understanding, that people's brains continue to develop even in the exteriors, consciousness and different things come online through the 20s. So we have a new stage of life that's actually been brought online here. But we think by 30, you pretty much ought to have it together. And that's actually true. We could see that in terms of people developing through the stages, that there's a plateau that happens in midlife. But then, if we're lucky enough to live into the 60s and, you know, our careers change and this whole new era of life opens up to us, there's a new spike in stage development that is good to keep in mind.
Interesting.
Yeah.
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 That was what I wanted to ask you, because, you know, when you're offering development experiences to people, I mean, we had a course we ran at the end of last year, and one of our participants was 89. And he is as vibrant and determined to make a difference as you could imagine. And cognitively, you know,
No, it's amazing.
I've got a stepmom who's got dementia, so I know the difference, you know, and yeah.
No, there are people who are just what you said, 89, and they're still happening. They're sort of freaks of nature in a way, but they're there, and it's wonderful. And you can see that when we talk about the generations and OK Boomer and so forth, and, you know, this is just the way of things, and it's a culture, and it's in a way fun. But there's, I think, a new appreciation I think of Bernie Sanders, for instance. His great base of support is young people.
Yeah,
they're not turned off that he's 78 and had a heart attack. They're listening to every word, and they're resonating, and that's. I think that there really is a new opportunity for people of our age to blossom in a way that lights up things for not just us, but for other people. And I think that's an exciting opportunity. But it's like you said, Anne, it doesn't have to be big.
No.
You know, it can
Let's
be.
not do that to ourselves.
No, please. And here's where you think, well, maybe it's like you talked about the people who are just happy to be grandparents.
Yeah.
And I think of my great grandmother, who was, she's an angel to everybody in our family, big family. And she was always the gold standard for goodness and love. And talk about the grandparent who sees everybody and loves them and just knows that they're all a mess, but they love them anyway. So you could have this sort of really high consciousness, and you're not, but to look at it from the exterior, you're just baking cookies. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole lot more going on than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
and
exciting.
That gets you into, you take me back into some old integral stuff as well, about stages and states and maturity and things.
Yes. Yeah. So it's been really fun. Yeah.
Really. I just feel wrapped up in goodness. That's what I feel.
Yeah,
Seriously.
Me too.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? And you're in Scotland and I'm in Colorado, and this is happening in real time, and our hearts are connected. And, that's just really an amazing thing. So,
and keep doing the work that you're doing. When your Daily Evolver comes into my email box, I don't know if others feel the same. I go, oh, goody. And I always carve out a time undisturbed to enjoy it.
Well,
seriously, to know that you're touching across the planet.
That is so, I can't believe I get to do it, and it's working. And thank you, Anne Roberts. And I'd like to give people an opportunity to check out your work, and I'm loving it. And so how might people find out more about you?
Oh, Jeff, I'm not ready for that. Oh, God.
Well, you've got your Active Vision, Active Wisdom Inquiry.
So I'm doing a video blog with elders who have something to say about the stage of elderhood, either as a rite of passage or as working with youngers. I'm also interested in authors, so I'm interviewing a number of authors who have researched this time in our lives where we are living longer and we want to make a difference. That's what my generation wants to do, make a difference for the people and the projects and the communities that we love. I have a website, which I'll send you. It's called Active Wisdom, an Inquiry into Elderhood. Please reach out to me. I'm very happy to hear people's stories. I just love it.
Yeah, and you just did an interview with my friend Sue Brightman, our mutual friend Sue Brightman, and she has such great insight into.
I was at university. I went back and did a master's, and she introduced me to Mary Catherine Bateson's work. So she's a really good buddy around this research into this emerging stage of the human life cycle.
Right on. Well said. Well, thank you for reaching out, Anne Roberts, and Godspeed in your work, and we'll stay in touch. Yeah, and thank you all for listening. Well, Anne, I didn't think that would turn into an episode, but I think maybe it has. That was really great.
Oh, good.